Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and I am back with another video and back with another card using a very similar color scheme to my last card. So the funny thing is this card was basically inspired by the jewels I'm going to use at the end. I had those pulled out for the previous week's color throwdown challenge, and then the last card I made with the monsters. The jewels just didn't go with the images and everything. So I had these jewels sitting here and I was like, I really wanted to use them. So I was like, I'm going to make another card using these colors just to give me an excuse to use the jewels. So I pulled out the Simon Says Stamp Beautiful Flowers 2 stamp set. And this video is titled like take 3 of this because this is the third video I've done using this. And the original Beautiful Flowers 2, or original Beautiful Flowers stamp set. I think I did I've done like 5 or 6 videos. Like these are some of my favorite stamp sets. I love this large flower. So I started with some B watercolor paper that is 6x9. So I cut it in half. So this is 4.5 by 6 inches. I put it in my large stamp platform, and I have this large, huge stamp, adjusted so it's kind of going across, the upper portion of it. And I'm stamping it twice with Versamark ink because this watercolor paper has a bit of texture. And I want to make sure I stamp this really good. So I've stamped it with clear embossing ink twice. And I'm going to coat it with a white embossing powder. And this part is always when I'm like, oh, good. I did actually get everything stamped. All that detail showed up. So I do that. And then I'm going to melt this with my heat tool until it is smooth and melted. And when it's white on white, it's always difficult to see, even in real life. But after I think I'm done, I always tilt it back and forth in the light and just make sure that everything is shiny and smooth. And then I know I've melted all of that embossing powder. So after I've done that, I'm doing some very simple, very messy, very basic watercolor. I'm using a little Prima classic set. Anything's going to work. My 2 previous videos using this set, which I'll link to at the end. One I'd used distress inks, like regular distress inks. And then the other one I'd used, the Altenew watercolors. That's what I'd used. Anything will work. I just start with just layering on just clean water in the beginning. And I go past the image. And then I add some colors. So you could add whatever you want, whatever you're coloring with. Oxide inks look amazing. Regular distress inks, watercolors, liquid watercolors, any of that will work. So I just start with the clean water. I do a light layer of color and let it pull out past the stamped image. So it kind of looks like a little bit of a gloppy hot mess at first. And here, because I'm using the 2 blue colors, and I added a gray for the foliage instead of green. And then while it's still wet, it doesn't matter, but because I've heat embossed it, I can go back in when it's still wet. I start deepening the color on the actual image, but even then, I'm not perfect with it. I don't worry too much about getting everything exact. That's why I so fell in love with messy watercolor, because it really is a lot more freeing. You don't have to be so perfect. You don't have to worry about getting right inside the lines or coloring an image like the way it's supposed to be. This is just fun. So I just kind of go in and I don't have to put in a whole lot of effort. Sometimes I'll re-wet areas if they're drying faster than I can kind of catch up with. With these more turquoise color flowers, I just went in and just slapped on the color and then added a bit more depth by mixing the turquoise blue with the darker blue just to give it that little something. If you really wanted to go all out, you could go in let everything dry, go in with a 3rd layer and really add more depth and dimension. That would look amazing. I didn't with this. I just kind of wanted it just to be a little softer and pretty. So I went in, added the darker gray to the actual leaves. And then once I was just happy with this, once I've, enhanced all of the actual stamped image, I let it completely dry, which I did speed up with my heat tool, but I let it completely dry before adding any splatter. I didn't want, if you add splatter while it's still wet, the splatter is just going to, run into the watercolor and you're not going to have actual little, droplets of splatter. So I added the darker blue and the lighter blue, did both of those, and then decided, I need white splatter. That's my just thing. So there is a white watercolor in this little palette, but I don't like using any sort of watercolor usually when I'm doing splatter, unless it's my gouache. I have the Winsor & Newton gouache that I really like. But my latest favorite that I'm really liking is this Amsterdam acrylic ink that I've shown in a previous video, and I showed it in a haul video. And it's just a really, really opaque titanium white liquid. And the reason why I love it so much is I don't need to mess around like thinning it out with water or anything. I just put a couple drops on an acrylic block and it's good to go. But any white, if you really want to get into like the white splatter and that, like pretty much any, you know, white acrylic paint will work. I've shown using Copic opaque white, the white gouache, like so many different options out there. I'm just always looking for, it's like, ooh, what's this? This is new. I want to try it. So I did all that, let that dry again completely. And then I die cut it with the largest of the WONKY rectangles wafer dies. And then I die cut the Thinking of You wafer die from gray cardstock as well as white cardstock. Normally I would do, you know, just 3 layers of white. That's just kind of my go-to. But I decided to use the gray underneath. I thought it would be just kind of nice. It just gives it a little extra something. So I have 2 layers of these gray cardstock die cuts, and I just stacked them all together with my craft tacky glue and then topped it with the white cardstock die cut. So I went through and layered all of that to give it that nice dimension that I really like with die cut words. And then once I have everything adhered together, I have a little tiny sentiment from the Beautiful Flowers 2 set. And when I die cut the gray layers, there was just enough of kind of a gap there on the scrap cardstock that I decided to just use that for my sentiment. So I just used my anti-static powder tool. I'm going to stamp that little sentiment with the clear embossing ink, use the same detail white embossing powder and heat emboss that. So once I have that smooth and melted, I'm going to die cut this with one of the sentiment label wafer dies. Again, you could use your paper trimmer. I love these dies because then I don't have to fiddle so much with my paper trimmer to get straight cuts. Anything that makes life simpler for me, especially crafting simpler, I'm all for it. So clean up my embossing powder, funnel it back in the container, put the lid on so I don't knock it over. And then I'm going to die cut this with that wafer die, just tape it into place with my washi tape, run that through the machine, and then trim off the ends with my paper trimmer. So I've got that die cut. So now I'm just going to adhere that die cut Thinking of You using that same craft tacky glue, just applying really thin amounts to the thickest areas of the sentiment. I don't coat the entire thing because it's not necessary. And I started with the top word to kind of get that straight, and then adhered the rest of the word and the dots to the eyes. So once that's all adhered, the actual little die cut sentiment, I'm just going to adhere right on top of those with that craft tacky glue. So it says thinking of you, and then you mean the world to me. So I've got all of that adhered. And then my card base is some blue cardstock. I've already like trimmed it down and scored it. It's 4 1/4 by 11, scored at 5 1/2. And I'm putting it in upside down so that the inside of the card, it's upside down because I kind of wanted to line up that stamp and I didn't want to move it around. It didn't seem, what's the point? So I lined that up in my stamp platform, and then I'm just inking up that floral stamp with Peacock Feathers Distress Oxide ink because this shows up on dark cardstock. So stamp that onto the inside of the card. And then I had to make sure this was completely dry. So I did use my heat tool to dry this. You could let it air dry. It just can sometimes take a while for the oxide inks because it's a pigment hybrid. So made sure that was completely dry, because if it was wet, 1, it would smear when I add my anti-static powder tool, and 2, it would pick up all the embossing powder. So I made sure it was completely dry. I was very liberal with my anti-static powder tool. And then I stamped this sentiment. This is from the So Loved stamp set. And I stamped that with the clear embossing ink, and then I'm going to coat that with the white embossing powder and then melt that with my heat tool. So it says, you're the bestest. So melt that with my heat tool. And then to adhere the card front to the base, I'm just using some of Simon's Big Mama foam tape just to pop that up with a bit of dimension. Plus it keeps it a lot flatter because it is kind of warped and whatnot from the watercoloring and everything. So got that adhered, and then pulled out the jewels that, you know, inspired the whole card basically. These are the little things from Lucy's cards, the Lucy's jewels in Deep Pool and Blueberry. So I kind of sprinkled those rather liberally along these flowers here, and I'm just going to adhere them with dabs of the craft tacky glue, just picking them up with my little jewel picker and then pressing those into place. So once I have all the jewels adhered, ended up adding a few more because that's going to finish off this card. So as always, I will have a link below the video to my blog post. I'll have links to the supplies used, and all that info will be in the description box below the video. You can check that out if you're interested. Thank you all so much for watching, for subscribing, for thumbs upping and commenting on my videos. I really appreciate it. I'll see you all very soon in the next one. Bye.